My wife used my paychecks to furnish her new apartment, but I saw the delivery emails. You know, after 32 years of marriage, you think you know someone. You think you've seen all their faces, heard all their stories, weathered all their storms together. But sometimes the person sleeping next to you every night can become a complete stranger without you even realizing it. My name is Matthew. I'm 57 years old, and I'm about to tell you how I discovered that my wife Sarah had been systematically stealing my paychecks to furnish a secret apartment I never knew existed. It started on a Tuesday morning in October. The leaves were just beginning to turn that brilliant orange and red that makes Philadelphia so beautiful in the fall. I was sitting in my home office, a converted bedroom in our two-story colonial in Germantown, going through my emails before heading to the construction site. I've been a project manager for commercial construction for the past 15 years, ever since I transitioned out of hands-on carpentry work. The pay is good, steady, and it's allowed Sarah and me to live comfortably in a neighborhood we both love. I was scrolling through the usual morning flood of emails when something caught my eye, a delivery confirmation from West Elm. Now, Sarah and I hadn't bought anything from West Elm recently. In fact, we hadn't bought any new furniture in years. Our house was already fully furnished, and we weren't the type to redecorate on a whim. The subject line read, "Your West Elm order has been delivered to 1247 Chestnut Street, Apartment 3B. My blood ran cold. 1247 Chestnut Street wasn't our address. We lived on Mannheim Street. I clicked on the email thinking maybe it was some kind of mistake, a misdirected message that had somehow ended up in my inbox. But there it was, clear as day. My email address. An order for a complete living room set totaling $3,200, charged to what appeared to be our joint checking account. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. The morning sun was streaming through the window, casting long shadows across my desk, and I could hear Sarah downstairs in the kitchen, humming while she made her morning coffee. Everything seemed so normal, so perfectly ordinary. Yet I was looking at evidence of something I couldn't quite comprehend. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and opened our banking app. I'd been meaning to check our account balance anyway, since I'd noticed we seemed to be spending more money lately. But Sarah always handled the household finances, so I'd trusted her judgment. What I saw when the app loaded made my stomach drop to the floor. Our checking account, which should have had at least $8,000 from my last two paychecks, had a balance of $437. I scrolled through the recent transactions with growing horror. West Elm, Pottery Barn, CB2, Williams-Sonoma, Target, Bed Bath & Beyond. Hundreds of dollars here, thousands there, all within the past 6 weeks, all delivered to the same address on Chestnut Street. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. 32 years of marriage. We'd raised 2 kids together, Emma and Michael, both now in their late 20s and living their own lives. Emma was a nurse in Seattle, married to a good man named David, with 2 kids of her own. Michael was finishing his residency in Chicago, engaged to his college sweetheart, Lisa. Sarah and I had talked about this being our golden years, about traveling, about maybe selling the big house and downsizing now that it was just the 2 of us. But apparently Sarah had been making other plans. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, the familiar sound of her slippers against the hardwood. "Matthew, honey, I'm heading out to run some errands," she called from the hallway. "I'll be back this afternoon." "Okay," I managed to call back, my voice sounding strange and distant even to my own ears. I heard the front door close, then the sound of her car starting in the driveway. Sarah drove a silver Honda Civic that we'd bought 3 years ago. Practical and reliable, just like I thought our marriage was. As soon as she was gone, I was back on my computer, printing out bank statements, transaction records, anything I could find. The pattern became clearer with each page. The spending had started in early September, right around the time Sarah had mentioned wanting to take some personal time to figure out what she wanted to do with the next chapter of her life. She'd been talking about maybe going back to school or starting a small business or volunteering more with the local animal shelter where she'd been helping out for the past few years. I'd been supportive, encouraging even. At 54, Sarah was still young enough to reinvent herself, and after spending the better part of 3 decades raising our children and managing our household, I thought she deserved the chance to pursue her own dreams. I never imagined those dreams involved stealing from me to set up what appeared to be a secret life. The evidence was overwhelming. In 6 weeks, nearly $15,000 had been spent on furniture, electronics, kitchenware, and what looked like enough supplies to fully stock an apartment. All delivered to 1247 Chestnut Street, apartment 3B. I looked up the address online and found it was a modern apartment complex in Center City, one of those upscale buildings with a doorman and a fitness center and panoramic views of the city skyline. I spent the rest of the morning going through every financial record I could access. Credit card statements revealed even more purchases I hadn't authorized or been told about. A security deposit for an apartment lease, utility setup fees, internet installation. She'd been planning this for months, methodically siphoning money from our accounts to build herself a new life, all while lying to my face every single day. The worst part wasn't even the money, though $15,000 was nothing to sneeze at on a construction manager's salary. The worst part was the betrayal, the complete and utter deception. Every morning for the past 2 months, Sarah had kissed me goodbye, told me she loved me, asked about my day when I came home from work. She'd cooked dinner, watched television with me, made love to me, all while secretly building an escape route funded by my paychecks. By the time she came home that afternoon, I had everything printed out and organized in a neat stack on the kitchen table. Bank statements, credit card bills, delivery confirmations, lease agreements I'd managed to track down through some online detective work. I was sitting there waiting for her when she walked through the door, carrying shopping bags from Target and looking completely relaxed and happy. "Hi, honey," she said, setting the bags down and leaning over to kiss my cheek. "How was your day?" I looked at her for a long moment. This woman I'd shared more than half my life with, and I barely recognized her. Her blonde hair was freshly styled, and she was wearing a new outfit I'd never seen before. She looked younger somehow, more vibrant, like she'd been carrying a secret that energized her rather than weighed her down. "Sarah," I said quietly, "we need to talk." Something in my tone must have alerted her because the smile faded from her face immediately. Her eyes darted to the papers on the table, and I saw the exact moment she realized what I'd discovered. Her face went pale, then flushed red, then pale again. "Matthew, I can explain," she started, but I held up my hand. "Can you?" I asked. "Can you explain why you've been stealing from our joint account to furnish an apartment I didn't know existed? Can you explain why you've spent $15,000 of my money without telling me? Can you explain why you've been lying to me every single day for months?" She sank into the chair across from me, and for the first time since I'd known her, Sarah looked genuinely ashamed. But even then, even with all the evidence laid out between us, I could see her mind working, trying to figure out how to spin this, how to make it seem less terrible than it was. "I was going to tell you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "When?" I asked. "After you'd moved out? After you'd cleaned out our entire savings account? When exactly were you planning to let me in on the fact that my wife of 32 years was planning to leave me?" "It's not like that," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her. "Then what is it like, Sarah? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been planning your exit strategy for months while pretending everything was fine between us." She started crying then, big tears rolling down her cheeks, and for a moment I felt that old instinct to comfort her, to make everything okay. But I forced myself to stay in my chair, to remember the stack of papers between us, the evidence of her betrayal. "I'm not happy, Matthew," she said through her tears. "I haven't been happy for years. I feel like I'm disappearing, like I'm just your wife and Emma and Michael's mother, but I don't know who I am anymore." I understood that feeling, I really did. The empty nest syndrome. The sense that your primary purpose in life had moved out and started their own families. But what I couldn't understand was why she thought stealing from me was the solution. "So you decided to steal from me to find yourself?" I asked. "I wasn't stealing," she protested. "It's our money, our joint account. Did you ask me before you spent it? Did you tell me you were setting up a secret apartment? Did you give me any choice in how my paychecks were being used?" She couldn't answer that because we both knew the truth. This wasn't about joint finances or marriage partnership. This was about deception and betrayal and theft, pure and simple. The next few hours were a blur of arguments and tears and accusations. Sarah tried to make it seem like this was about her needing space to figure herself out, like the apartment was just temporary, a place to think and be independent. But I'd seen the lease agreement. It was for a full year, and she'd put down first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit totaling $4,500. This wasn't a temporary arrangement. "How long have you been planning to leave me?" I asked, as the sun was setting outside our kitchen window. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe I'm not leaving, maybe I just need some time. Time that you're paying for with money you stole from me." "Stop calling it stealing," she snapped, showing the first flash of anger she'd displayed all afternoon. "We're married, it's community property. Community property that you've been secretly using to build a life that doesn't include me." That night, Sarah slept in the guest bedroom. I lay awake in our king-size bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out how I'd missed the signs. Had she been planning this for months? Years? When had she stopped loving me and started seeing me as nothing more than a source of funding for her new life? I thought about our last real conversation, probably 3 weeks ago, when she'd mentioned feeling restless and wanting to do something meaningful with her life. I'd encouraged her to pursue whatever made her happy. I'd told her we could afford for her to go back to school or start a business or take some time to volunteer more. I'd been supportive and understanding, never imagining that what would make her happy was leaving me behind. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in over 2 years. I needed time to think, time to figure out what to do next. Sarah was already gone when I woke up, another note on the kitchen counter saying she had errands to run. I wondered if those errands involved visiting her secret apartment, adding finishing touches to the life she'd built with my money. I decided to drive by the building on Chestnut Street just to see what $15,000 of my money had bought her. It was a beautiful building, sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a doorman in a uniform who looked like he'd stepped out of a luxury hotel. The kind of place that probably rented for $3,000 or $4,000 a month, far more than we could afford, on top of our existing mortgage and expenses. I sat in my truck across the street, watching people come and go, wondering if Sarah was up there in apartment 3B, enjoying the view and the independence that my paychecks had provided. I felt like a fool, like the clueless husband in a bad movie who doesn't realize his wife has been planning her escape for months. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma in Seattle. "Hey Dad, just checking in. How are you and Mum doing?" I stared at the message for a long time, trying to figure out how to answer. How do you tell your daughter that her mother has been stealing money to set up a secret apartment? How do you explain that the marriage she'd grown up believing was solid and loving might be over? I texted back, "We're fine, sweetheart. Just dealing with some stuff. How are the kids?" She responded immediately with pictures of my grandchildren, 4-year-old Sophie and 2-year-old Jake, playing in their backyard in Seattle. Looking at their smiling faces, I felt a stab of pain so sharp it took my breath away. These kids barely knew me because of the distance, but they were part of Sarah's life too. If we divorced, would I lose even more access to them? Would Sarah move across the country to be closer to Emma, taking herself completely out of my life? I drove home and found Sarah's car in the driveway. She was in the kitchen making lunch, moving around our familiar space like nothing had changed, like she hadn't completely upended our life with her deception. "We need to talk about what happens next," I said without preamble. She turned around, and I could see she'd been crying again. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she looked older than her 54 years. "I know," she said quietly. "I know I screwed up, Matthew. I know I should have talked to you instead of doing what I did. So what now? Do you want a divorce? Do you want to move into your secret apartment and pretend the last 32 years never happened?" "I don't know," she said, and the honesty in her voice was somehow worse than if she'd just said yes. "I don't know what I want anymore." "Well, I know what I want," I said. "I want my wife back. The woman I married, the woman who used to talk to me instead of stealing from me. But I don't think that woman exists anymore." Over the next few days, we barely spoke to each other. Sarah would leave early in the morning and come back late in the evening, and I started to suspect she was spending her days at the apartment, making herself at home in the space she'd created with my money. I continued going to work, but my heart wasn't in it. My crew could tell something was wrong, but I wasn't ready to talk about it yet. A week after I'd discovered the apartment, I came home to find Sarah packing suitcases in our bedroom. She looked up when I walked in, her face resigned and sad. "I think I need to stay at the apartment for a while," she said, "just to figure things out." "How long is a while?" I asked. "I don't know, a few weeks, maybe a month. A month that I'll be paying for, since it's my money that's funding this little journey of self-discovery." She flinched at that, but she didn't deny it. "I'll pay you back," she said. "With what money, Sarah? You haven't worked in 20 years. "I'll get a job, I'll figure it out." I watched her fold clothes and pack toiletries, this woman who'd shared my bed for over 3 decades, and I felt like I was watching a stranger. She was taking our wedding photo from the nightstand, I noticed, along with some jewelry I'd bought her over the years, cherry-picking the parts of our life together that she wanted to keep while discarding the rest. "What do I tell the kids?" I asked. "Tell them I need some space to figure out what I want to do with my life. And what do I tell myself?" She stopped packing and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in days. "I'm sorry, Matthew. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am truly sorry. Sorry for stealing from me or sorry for getting caught." She didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. After she left, the house felt enormous and empty. 32 years of shared memories echoed in every room, but they felt hollow now, tainted by the knowledge of how easily she'd been able to deceive me. I found myself questioning everything. Had she ever really loved me, or had I just been a means to an end? When had she stopped seeing me as her partner and started seeing me as her bank account? I called my brother Tom in Denver that night, needing to talk to someone who'd known Sarah and me since the beginning. Tom was 2 years older than me and had been married to his wife Janet for 35 years. If anyone could help me make sense of this situation, it would be him. "She did what?" he said when I told him about the apartment and the money. $15,000, Tom. Maybe more that I haven't found yet. All to set up a secret apartment downtown." "Jesus, Matt. I'm so sorry. I had no idea things were that bad between you two." "Neither did I admitted. "I thought we were doing okay. Sure, things had gotten a little routine since the kids moved out, but I thought that was normal. I thought we were just settling into the next phase of our marriage. Have you talked to a lawyer?" The question hung in the air between us. A lawyer meant making this real, admitting that my marriage might actually be over. "Not yet," I said. "I keep thinking maybe she'll come to her senses and come home." "Matt," Tom said gently, "she stole $15,000 from you to set up a secret apartment. That's not a woman who's planning to come home." He was right, of course, but I wasn't ready to face that reality yet. Some part of me still hoped this was all a terrible mistake, a midlife crisis that would pass and leave us stronger than before. But 2 weeks went by with no word from Sarah, except for a few brief texts about needing more time. I drove by the apartment building a few more times, and twice I saw her car parked outside. She was really living there, really building a life that didn't include me, all funded by money she'd taken from our joint account without permission. The breaking point came when I got a call from our credit card company about some unusual activity on our account. $2,500 at a furniture store, $1,800 at an electronics retailer, $600 at a high-end grocery store that delivered to upscale apartment buildings. All in the past week, all charged to the card she still had access to. That's when I realized she wasn't just living in the apartment I'd unknowingly paid for. She was continuing to use our joint finances to upgrade and maintain her new lifestyle. The theft wasn't a one-time thing. It was ongoing. I called her immediately, and for the first time in 2 weeks she answered. "Hello, Matthew. Sarah, you've spent another $5,000 this week on our credit card." There was a long pause. "I needed some things for the apartment. Things that I'm paying for, again. I told you I'd pay you back. When? How? You don't have a job, you don't have any income, and you're racking up debt faster than I can make money. I'm looking for work. Where? What kind of work? You haven't had a job in 20 years, Sarah. What exactly are you qualified to do that's going to pay enough to cover a downtown apartment and pay me back the $20,000 you've stolen? Stop calling it stealing. What else would you call it? You took money from our joint account without telling me and used it for something I didn't agree to. That's the definition of theft. She hung up on me. Actually hung up on me, like I was the one being unreasonable. That night, I finally called a lawyer. Not because I wanted a divorce, but because I needed to protect myself financially before Sarah drained our entire life savings to fund her new independent lifestyle. The lawyer, a woman named Rebecca Martinez who specialized in divorce and family law, listened to my story with the kind of professional sympathy that told me she'd heard similar tales before. The good news is that Pennsylvania is an equitable distribution state, which means marital assets are divided fairly. Not necessarily equally, she explained. The bad news is that your wife has already started the process of asset division without your consent. Can I stop her from accessing our accounts? You can remove her from accounts that are solely in your name, but joint accounts are trickier. She has as much legal right to that money as you do, even if she's using it in ways you don't approve of. So she can just keep stealing from me. Legally speaking, it's not theft if it's a joint account, but her behavior could be considered financial misconduct in divorce proceedings, which could affect how assets are divided. The word divorce hit me like a physical blow. After 32 years, was that really where we were headed? I don't want a divorce, I told Rebecca. I want my wife to come home and for us to work this out. I understand, she said gently, but you need to be realistic about the situation. Your wife has spent months planning and financing a separate life. That's not the behavior of someone who's committed to working things out. I left Rebecca's office with more questions than answers, and a retainer agreement I wasn't sure I was ready to sign. But I also left with a clearer understanding of my legal options and the financial protections I needed to put in place. That evening, I did something I probably should have done weeks earlier. I opened a new checking account in my name only and arranged for my paychecks to be deposited there instead of our joint account. If Sarah wanted to continue living her independent lifestyle, she'd have to figure out how to pay for it herself. The next morning, I got a furious phone call from her. "You cut off my access to money," she accused. "I redirected my paychecks to an account you can't access," I corrected. "There's still money in our joint account." $400, Matthew. There's $400 left. That's what happens when you spend $20,000 in 2 months. How am I supposed to live? The question was so absurd, so completely lacking in self-awareness, that I almost laughed. I don't know, Sarah. How do most adults live? They get jobs, they earn money, they pay their own bills. You can't just cut me off. I can't continue funding a lifestyle I didn't agree to. If you want to live independently, then live independently, but don't expect me to pay for the privilege of being abandoned. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, is this how our marriage ends? With you being cruel and vindictive? Cruel and vindictive, I repeated. Sarah, you stole $20,000 from me to set up a secret apartment, and now you're calling me cruel for not wanting to continue paying for it? I never said I was leaving forever. You never said you weren't. Another long pause. Maybe we should talk to someone, a counselor or something. It was the first constructive thing she'd said in weeks, but it was also too little too late. Are you willing to move back home? Are you willing to close the apartment and return the money you've spent? I can't just give up the apartment. I signed a lease that I paid for. I need the space, Matthew. I need to figure out who I am outside of being your wife. Then figure it out on your own dime. I hung up feeling both guilty and relieved. Guilty because I'd never spoken to Sarah that harshly in 32 years of marriage. Relieved because I'd finally stood up for myself instead of just absorbing her betrayal and hoping things would magically get better. Over the next few weeks, Sarah called several more times, alternating between anger and pleading. She'd found a part-time job at a boutique clothing store, she told me, but it didn't pay enough to cover her apartment rent and living expenses. She needed me to help her transition to independence, she said. She just needed a few more months of financial support while she got on her feet. Each time, I told her the same thing. I wasn't funding her journey of self-discovery anymore. If she wanted to be independent, she needed to actually be independent. The breaking point came in early December. I was working late on a project proposal, when my phone rang. It was Sarah, and she was crying. "Matthew, I need help," she sobbed. "I can't make rent this month. They're going to evict me." "Get a second job," I said, though not without sympathy. Despite everything she'd done, hearing her cry still affected me. "I can't work 2 jobs. I'm 54 years old, and I haven't worked in decades. Nobody wants to hire me for anything that pays decent money." "Maybe you should have thought about that before you spent $20,000 of our money setting up an apartment you couldn't afford. Please, Matthew, I'm begging you. Just help me through the next few months and I promise I'll pay you back." "With what money? You just said you can barely make minimum wage." "I'll figure something out." "No, Sarah, I'm done. You made your choice when you decided to steal from me and lie to me for months. Now you get to live with the consequences." She cried harder then, and I felt like the worst person in the world. But I also knew that if I gave in now, I'd be enabling her to continue this pattern indefinitely. She'd never truly become independent if she knew she could always fall back on my financial support. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered. "You're supposed to come home," I said. "You're supposed to give up the apartment you never should have gotten in the first place and work on fixing our marriage instead of running away from it." "I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because I don't love you anymore." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd suspected it, of course, but hearing her say it out loud was devastating. After 32 years, 2 children, a lifetime of shared experiences and memories, she didn't love me anymore. "When did you stop?" I asked quietly. "I don't know. Maybe years ago. Maybe I never loved you the way I thought I did." It was the cruelest thing she'd ever said to me, and probably the most honest. I sat in my office, staring out at the Philadelphia skyline, and felt something inside me break completely. "Then I guess we're done," I said. "Matthew, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did. And you know what? Maybe that's for the best. Maybe we both deserve better than a marriage where one person hasn't been happy for years and the other person was too stupid to notice." I hung up and sat in the silence of my office for a long time. 32 years of marriage over. Not with a dramatic fight or a moment of passion, but with a quiet admission that the love had died somewhere along the way, and neither of us had been brave enough to say so until now. The next day, I called Rebecca Martinez and signed the retainer agreement for divorce proceedings. If Sarah didn't love me anymore and refused to give up the apartment that had caused all this trouble, then there was no point in trying to save our marriage. The divorce process was surprisingly straightforward, mostly because Sarah couldn't afford to fight it. She'd been evicted from the apartment she couldn't pay for and had moved in with a friend from her volunteer work at the animal shelter. The furniture and electronics she'd bought with my money were either sold or in storage, and she was working 2 part-time jobs just to cover basic living expenses. When we met with the mediator to divide our assets, Sarah looked smaller somehow, deflated and tired in a way I'd never seen before. The apartment adventure hadn't given her the independence and fulfillment she'd been looking for. Instead, it had left her financially struggling and professionally struggling, a middle-aged woman with no marketable skills trying to rebuild her life from scratch. "I'm sorry," she said to me as we signed the final papers. "I know that doesn't change anything, but I'm truly sorry for how I handled all of this." "I know," I said. And I did. I could see in her eyes that she regretted the way things had unfolded, even if she didn't regret leaving the marriage. "Do you think we could have made it work? If I'd talked to you instead of doing what I did?" I thought about it for a moment. "I don't know. Maybe. But we'll never know now, will we?" She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "I made such a mess of everything." "Yeah," I agreed, "you did." The house felt different after the divorce was finalized. Not empty exactly, but lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. I kept most of our furniture and belongings since Sarah was living in a small apartment she could actually afford and didn't have room for much. I also kept the house itself, which was paid off and represented most of our joint assets. Sarah received half the value in our retirement accounts and some cash, enough to give her a modest cushion while she figured out her new life. Emma and Michael took the divorce hard, especially when they learned about the financial deception that had precipitated it. Emma flew out from Seattle for a weekend, shortly after the papers were signed, leaving her kids with David so she could spend some time with me. "I can't believe Mom did that to you," she said as we sat on the back porch, drinking coffee and watching the neighbors' kids play in their yard. "People do things when they're unhappy that they never thought they'd do," I said. "Your mother wasn't evil, Emma. She was just lost. That doesn't excuse stealing from you." "No, it doesn't. But understanding why someone does something doesn't mean you have to excuse it." Emma studied my face. "Are you okay, Dad? Really okay?" I considered the question seriously. Was I okay? I was 57 years old, newly divorced after more than 3 decades of marriage, living alone in a house that had been built for a family. By most measures, I should have been devastated. But the truth was, I felt more at peace than I had in months. The uncertainty was over. The financial hemorrhaging had stopped. I no longer had to wonder what Sarah was doing with our money, or whether she was being honest with me about her plans and feelings. "I think I am," I told Emma. "It's not the life I planned, but it's not a bad life either." "Are you going to date? I mean, eventually?" The question made me laugh. "Honey, I've been with your mother since I was 25 years old. I have no idea how to date. I'm not even sure I want to." "You're still young, Dad. You've got a lot of good years left." "Maybe. Right now, I'm just focused on figuring out what those years are going to look like." Over the following months, I did exactly that. I threw myself into work with renewed energy, taking on bigger projects and more responsibilities. I started traveling for the first time in years, visiting construction sites in other cities and taking weekend trips to places Sarah had never wanted to go. I also reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with over the years, guys from my construction crew days who'd stayed in the trade or moved on to other things. It felt good to have conversations that didn't revolve around household management and family logistics, to remember parts of myself that had nothing to do with being a husband and father. Sarah and I settled into a cordial but distant relationship. We texted occasionally about logistics related to the kids or holidays, but we didn't talk on the phone or see each other in person unless absolutely necessary. She seemed to be adjusting to her new life, working steady hours at a retail job and living in a small but adequate apartment that she could afford on her own. Sometimes I wondered if she regretted giving up 32 years of marriage for an independence that turned out to be much harder and lonelier than she'd anticipated. But I never asked, and she never volunteered the information. The first Christmas after our divorce was the hardest part of the whole experience. Emma and David brought the kids to Philadelphia for a week, and Michael and Lisa came up from Chicago for a few days. We did our best to maintain family traditions, but Sarah's absence was palpable. The kids asked where Grandma was, and we had to explain in age-appropriate terms that Grandma and Grandpa weren't married anymore, but that we both loved them just as much as before. Sarah came by on Christmas Eve to see the grandchildren and exchange gifts. It was awkward and sad, seeing her in what had been her home for so many years, now as a visitor rather than a resident. She looked good, though, healthier somehow, like the stress of maintaining her deception had been weighing on her more than I'd realized. "The house looks nice," she said, glancing around the living room where Emma and I had put up the Christmas tree. "Thanks," I said. "Emma helped me decorate." "She's a good daughter." "Yes, she is." We stood there for a moment, two people who'd once planned to spend their golden years together, now making small talk like polite strangers. "Matthew," she said quietly, "I want you to know that I never meant for things to happen the way they did. I never meant to hurt you." "I know," I said. And I did know. Whatever else Sarah had done, I believed she'd never intended to cause the pain and chaos that had ultimately destroyed our marriage. "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" I thought about it. "I already have," I realized. "Not because what you did was okay, but because carrying anger around is exhausting. I don't want to spend the rest of my life bitter about something I can't change." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." After she left, Emma found me sitting in the kitchen, staring out the window at the snow that had started falling. "You okay, Dad?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I really am." And I was. Not because the divorce had been easy, or because I didn't miss the companionship of marriage, or because I wouldn't have preferred to find a way to work things out. But because I'd survived something I never thought I could survive, and I'd done it with my dignity intact. The new year brought unexpected opportunities. My boss at the construction company, Jim Rodriguez, called me into his office in late January with a proposal I hadn't seen coming. "Matt, I've been watching how you've handled everything this past year," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Not just the personal stuff, but the way you've thrown yourself into work, the leadership you've shown on the Morrison project. I'm impressed." "Thank you, Jim. Work has been a good distraction." "It's more than a distraction. You've been doing some of your best work, which is why I want to offer you a promotion. Senior project manager with a team of your own and a 20% salary increase." I stared at him, genuinely surprised. "Jim, I appreciate the offer, but I'm 57 years old. Most companies are looking to promote younger guys." "Most companies are stupid," he said bluntly. "You've got 30 years of experience. You know every aspect of this business from the ground up, and you've proven you can handle pressure. Plus, you're not going anywhere. You're not some hotshot 20-something who's going to jump ship for a better offer in 6 months. The promotion would mean more responsibility, more travel, and significantly more money. It would also mean building something new at a time in my life when I thought most of my building was behind me." "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Take all the time you need, but don't take too long. I want to announce the new structure by the end of February." That night, I called Tom in Denver to talk through the decision. "Are you kidding me?" he said when I told him about the promotion offer. "Matt, this is exactly what you need. New challenges, more money, a chance to prove to yourself that your life isn't over because your marriage ended." "I don't know, Tom. It's a lot of responsibility. And what if I fail? What if you succeed? Jesus, Matt, when did you become so afraid of taking risks?" It was a fair question. When had I become so cautious, so focused on maintaining the status quo instead of pursuing opportunities? Probably around the same time, I'd stopped noticing that my wife was desperately unhappy and planning her escape. "You're right," I admitted. "I've been playing it safe for too long. So take the promotion. Worst case scenario, you fail spectacularly and end up where you are now. Best case scenario, you build something amazing and set yourself up for a great retirement." I accepted the promotion the next week, and within a month I was overseeing a team of 6 project managers and coordinating construction on 3 major commercial developments across Pennsylvania and New Jersey. The learning curve was steep, but I found myself energized by the challenge in a way I hadn't felt in years. The increased salary also gave me options I hadn't had before. I could afford to travel more, to pursue hobbies I'd never had time for, to think about what I wanted the next phase of my life to look like. For the first time since the divorce, I started to see the end of my marriage not just as a loss, but as an opportunity. In March, I got an unexpected phone call from Michael in Chicago. "Dad, I have some news," he said, and something in his tone made me sit down. "Good news or bad news?" "Good news, I think. Lisa and I are getting married in June. We wanted to keep it small, just family, but we'd like you to walk her down the aisle if you're willing." I was confused. Why would I walk Lisa down the aisle? What about her father? Her dad passed away when she was in high school. Her mom remarried, but her stepfather was never really a father figure to her. She considers you more of a dad than anyone else in her life. I was deeply touched. Lisa and I had always gotten along well, but I'd had no idea she thought of me as a father figure. "Of course I'll walk her down the aisle," I said. "I'd be honored." "There's something else," Michael said. "We've been talking about the guest list and we're not sure whether to invite Mom. I mean, we want her there, but we're worried about making things awkward for you." It was a fair concern. Sarah and I had been civil during the holidays, but a wedding would be a much longer and more emotional event. "It's your wedding, son. Invite whoever you want. Your mother and I are adults. We can handle being in the same room for one day. Are you sure?" "I'm sure. She's your mother and she loves you and Lisa. She should be there." The wedding was beautiful. Lisa looked radiant in a simple white dress, and Michael couldn't stop smiling. Sarah and I managed to be cordial to each other throughout the ceremony and reception, even sharing a brief conversation about how proud we were of our son. "He looks happy," she said, as we watched Michael and Lisa dance to their first song as a married couple. "Yeah, he does. They both do. I'm glad he found someone who loves him the way Lisa does. There was something wistful in her voice, and I wondered if she was thinking about us, about what we'd had in the early days of our own marriage. "Sarah," I said impulsively, "are you happy? I mean really happy with the way things turned out?" She was quiet for a long moment, watching our son dance with his new wife. "Some days," she said finally, "some days I think I made the biggest mistake of my life. Other days I remember why I felt so trapped and desperate that I did what I did. Do you regret the way you handled it?" "Every day," she said without hesitation. "I should have talked to you. I should have been honest about how I was feeling instead of what I did. You deserved better than that. We both deserved better than that." She looked at me then, really looked at me, for the first time in months. "You look good, Matthew. Happy. The promotion suits you." "Thank you, you look good too. Healthier." "I feel healthier. Physically, emotionally. It's been hard, but I think I needed to go through it. Even if it cost you our marriage. I don't know. Maybe our marriage was already over, and I was just too scared to admit it. Maybe if I'd been brave enough to talk to you about how I was feeling, we would have realized we'd grown apart and could have separated amicably instead of the way we did." It was probably the most honest conversation we'd had in years, and it gave me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. Later that evening, as I was getting ready to leave the reception, Lisa pulled me aside. "Thank you for walking me down the aisle," she said, tears in her eyes. "It meant the world to me. Thank you for asking me to do it. It was one of the highlights of my year. I hope you know how much Michael and I love you. Just because you and Sarah aren't together anymore doesn't change the fact that you're family to us. I love you both too, sweetheart, and I'm not going anywhere." The summer after Michael's wedding, I decided to take my first real vacation in years. I'd been thinking about visiting Emma and her family in Seattle, but I also had a crazy idea about taking a solo trip to Italy, something I'd always wanted to do, but Sarah had never been interested in. "Go to Italy," Emma said when I called to discuss my vacation plans. "Dad, when are you going to get another chance to do something like that? David and I can bring the kids to Philadelphia for Christmas this year. You should do something just for you." So I did. I spent 2 weeks in Italy, starting in Rome and working my way north to Florence and Venice. It was the first time I'd traveled alone since I was in my 20s, and I was nervous about whether I'd enjoy my own company for that long. But it turned out to be exactly what I needed. I could go where I wanted, eat what I wanted, spend as long as I wanted looking at art or architecture or just sitting in cafes watching people go by. I struck up conversations with other travelers, practiced my rusty Italian with locals, and generally rediscovered parts of myself that had been dormant for decades. On my last night in Venice, I was sitting at a canal-side restaurant, drinking wine and watching gondolas drift by in the evening light, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi, Matthew. This is Janet, Tom's wife. I hope you don't mind me texting you directly, but I have someone I'd like you to meet. She's a lovely woman, recently widowed, about your age. I think you two might really hit it off. Would you be interested in a casual dinner when you get back from your trip? No pressure, just 3 couples having dinner together, so it's not awkward." I stared at the text for a long time. Dating. The idea still seemed foreign to me, but also, for the first time, not entirely unappealing. I was 58 years old, financially stable, emotionally healthy, and genuinely enjoying my life. Maybe it was time to consider sharing that life with someone new. I texted back, "Janet, I'm flattered that you thought of me. Let me think about it and get back to you when I return from Italy. Take all the time you need. Her name is Patricia, and she's wonderful. No pressure, but I think you'd really like her." The rest of my evening in Venice was spent thinking about possibilities I hadn't considered in over a year. Not necessarily romance, but companionship. Someone to travel with, to share experiences with, to have conversations with that went beyond work and family logistics. When I got back to Philadelphia, I felt like a different person than the one who'd left 2 weeks earlier. More confident, more open to new experiences, more aware of how much life I still had ahead of me. I called Janet and agreed to the dinner. Patricia turned out to be a retired teacher whose husband had died of cancer 3 years earlier. She was smart and funny and kind, with grey hair she wore in a stylish bob, and laugh lines around her eyes that spoke of a life well lived despite recent tragedy. We didn't fall in love that night, or even on our second dinner together the following week. But we enjoyed each other's company, and slowly, carefully we began building a friendship that felt comfortable and natural. "I'm not looking to replace my late husband," Patricia told me over coffee one Saturday morning in October, "and I imagine you're not looking to replace your ex-wife, but maybe we're both looking for companionship, for someone to share experiences with." "I think that's exactly what I'm looking for," I agreed. By Christmas, Patricia and I were seeing each other regularly, though we both maintained our own homes and our own independence. Emma and the kids loved her when they visited for the holidays, and even Michael and Lisa approved when they met her during a weekend visit. "She's not trying to be mom," Emma observed. "She's just trying to be herself, and that's perfect." Sarah sent me a card that Christmas with a note inside. "Matthew, I heard through the kids that you're seeing someone. I'm happy for you. You deserve to be happy. I hope Patricia appreciates what a good man you are." It was a generous sentiment from a woman who had every reason to be bitter about how our story had ended. Looking back now, 2 years after that October morning, when I discovered the delivery emails that changed everything, I can honestly say that my life is better than it was when I was married to Sarah. Not because Sarah was a bad person, or because our marriage was terrible, but because the end of our marriage forced me to rediscover who I was as an individual rather than just as half of a couple. I'm successful in my career in ways I never imagined at 57. I have a relationship with Patricia that is built on mutual respect and shared interests rather than just shared history and obligation. I have a closer relationship with my children and grandchildren because I'm fully present when I'm with them, instead of distracted by marital problems I was too proud to acknowledge. Most importantly, I trust my own judgment again. I pay attention to red flags instead of ignoring them. I have honest conversations about difficult topics instead of assuming everything is fine. I take care of my own financial security instead of blindly trusting someone else to have my best interest at heart. The apartment on Chestnut Street that started this whole chain of events, it was eventually rented to a young couple just starting their careers in Philadelphia. I drove by it once, about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, and saw them moving furniture into the same space Sarah had furnished with my stolen money. They looked happy and excited about their new life together, the way Sarah and I had looked when we first bought our house in Germantown 35 years ago. I didn't feel angry anymore seeing that building. I felt grateful. Grateful that Sarah's betrayal had forced me to wake up and take control of my own life. Grateful that her deception had ended before she could do even more financial damage. Grateful that I'd discovered at 57 that I was capable of starting over and building something better. If you'd told me 3 years ago that my wife would steal $20,000 to furnish a secret apartment and that I'd end up thanking her for it, I'd have said you were crazy. But life has a way of surprising you. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Sarah never did pay me back the money she stole. She's living a modest life now, working full-time at a job she seems to enjoy, dating a man she met through her volunteer work at the animal shelter. She seems content, if not particularly happy, and I hope she's learned from the mistakes she made during our marriage. As for me, I'm planning another trip to Italy this spring, this time with Patricia. We're talking about visiting the Amalfi Coast, somewhere neither of us has been before. It feels good to have something to look forward to, something to plan with someone who wants to share the experience rather than endure it. My advice to anyone going through something similar: don't ignore the red flags. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Protect yourself financially, emotionally, and legally. And remember that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of a better one. The morning I found those delivery emails felt like the worst day of my life. Now I know it was actually the first day of my new life. A life where I'm fully awake, fully present, and fully responsible for my own happiness. And that's turned out to be a pretty good life indeed.